Imagine a queen at the height of her power, a woman the church called chosen by heaven, and the nobility saw as the very embodiment of resolve. In her hands rested not only the crown, but the fate of Spain itself, a kingdom standing on the brink of ultimate victory. The year was 1482. In a hall where candle smoke mingled with the scent of incense and the whispers of generals clashed with the drone of prayers, Isabella of Castile rose from her throne. She spoke words that froze the entire room. She swore before the Virgin Mary, before her counselors, priests, and soldiers, that she would not remove the simple white linen next to her skin until the final stronghold of Muslim rule on the Iberian Peninsula had fallen. The silence that followed was louder than any applause. Some believed they had witnessed the highest act of holiness, a queen binding herself to heaven not with gold or jewels, but with a piece of cloth meant to become the symbol of her faith. Others dismissed it as no more than a beautiful gesture, a show of humility that would last a few weeks at most. After all, even the harshest vows of kings were usually softened and eventually revoked. But not this one. In Isabella's eyes burned a cold fire. Her lips trembled not from doubt, but from determination. This vow was no figure of speech. It was to become her very life. At first, her decision inspired awe. Courtiers saw their queen as confident, devout, willing to sacrifice herself. Priests praised her humility, comparing her to the martyrs of early Christianity. And the armies gathered under the banners of Castile and Aragon felt as if heaven itself stood behind her. The war against Granada, the last Muslim stronghold in Spain, no longer seemed just a campaign. It became a crusade under the personal protection of the queen. Yet the first cracks soon appeared. Her attendants noticed that the queen's linen never changed. They exchanged uneasy glances but remained silent. Even the faintest suggestion that her vow should be eased was crushed by her icy stare. No physician dared to raise the subject. The risk was too great. The symbol of humility was slowly turning into a weapon. A body cannot endure the same garment against the skin for long. Heat, cold, blood, and sweat began to take their toll, but the queen did not waver. Each day she presided over her council, each evening she bent in prayer, and the cloth bit deeper into her flesh. Her endurance seemed miraculous, yet along with admiration came unease. What had begun as an act of devotion was already becoming something far darker. And with that came a question no one dared to say out loud. What happens when a symbol stops being a symbol and begins to consume the body and mind of the queen herself? Weeks turned into months, and the vow that many thought a passing whim only grew stronger. The same white cloth, hidden beneath her splendid gowns, remained unchanged. To most courtiers it was invisible, but for those closest to her, the signs became impossible to ignore. Summer brought its heat, and her heavy garments turned into a trap, holding in moisture and odor. The skin beneath the linen grew inflamed. The attendants who dressed her could smell the heavy air around her, but not one of them dared utter a word. A different kind of silence settled over the palace, not the silence of reverence, but the silence born of fear. More and more people realized that the symbol of devotion had turned into an ordeal, and that ordeal was changing Isabella herself. Her steps grew heavier, her gaze harsher. She still held councils, discussed campaigns, listened to sermons, yet with each passing month she seemed further removed from the world around her. Whispers spread through the corridors as attendants quietly spoke of strange stains glimpsed on the fabric beneath her gowns. Some said they were wounds,
others blood. But all their whispers carried the same weight, fear, and silence. To question the vow was to risk sacrilege. Courtiers became skilled at hiding their reactions. Those who had to stand near her kept perfumed cloths close to their faces, pretending to battle headaches or fatigue. The physicians, sworn to guard the health of monarchs, wrote only vague phrases: corruption of the flesh, excessive austerity, a need for humility. Behind their words lay terror. None of them wanted to be the one to speak plainly. None wished to provoke the wrath of a queen believed to be the instrument of heaven's will. What happened behind closed doors never reached the public, yet it was felt by all who crossed the palace threshold. The very air carried a tension. Even military reports, once handled with calm calculation, were now laced with omens and holy signs. Isabella was no longer only the political heart of the kingdom, she had become its mystical center as well. That fusion of piety and fear made her untouchable. But beyond the walls of her chambers, a new reality was taking shape. The linen she had sworn never to remove clung to her like a second skin, and with it grew the sense that the queen was drifting away from the living world, moving closer to something that frightened even her most loyal servants. Over time, the odor that clung to the queen was no longer a secret. At first, only her closest maids noticed. Then her counselors, trapped in long meetings, began to feel it. Soon, it could not be hidden even at public receptions. Those standing near her would lift sleeves scented with incense or kerchiefs dabbed with rose oil to their faces. To outsiders, the gestures looked like refined courtly manners. In truth, they were desperate acts of survival. Yet not one voice rose against her. Isabella was no longer seen as just a monarch. She had become a symbol, the living vessel of divine will. Any doubt about her vow could be branded blasphemy. The court was locked in collective silence. Everyone saw, everyone knew, but no one dared speak. Foreign envoys who came for negotiations were struck less by her resolve than by the dreadful atmosphere of her presence. One Italian ambassador wrote on returning home that being near the queen was like stepping into a dwelling where even the air itself was pain. French envoys confessed that after meeting her, they lost their appetites and suffered nausea for days. Her own inner circle also began to change. Those who once entered her chambers with ease now moved with solemn composure, as though entering a shrine, fearful of showing the slightest disrespect. Even priests, once eager to bless her, kept their distance, preferring to pray from afar rather than breathe the air in her presence. Thus the court turned into a place where appearances replaced reality. Halls gleamed with gold fabrics, carpets, and icons, but behind the splendor lay a heavy emptiness. Music at receptions no longer brought joy. Dances and laughter became rare. Any sign of levity was deemed inappropriate in the shadow of a queen who had sacrificed herself for victory.
Isabella, however, carried on as if nothing was happening. Her face showed the same focus, her voice the same command. But in her eyes now burned a new coldness, one that allowed no dissent. She no longer saw her vow as just holy. She saw her suffering as proof of divine election. The court stood frozen, and with it, the entire kingdom held its breath, for the image of the queen reached far beyond castles and churches. Spain lived under the weight of her vow, unaware of the terrible price it was already exacting. Month by month, not only the court, but Isabella herself transformed. Her determination, once admired, now took on another hue. Where she once tolerated differing opinions, she now answered even small disagreements with flashes of anger. Her gaze grew icy, her voice sharp. She demanded not only obedience, but absolute agreement. New rituals appeared to which she gave special weight. Prayers had to be recited in exact order, candles placed in even numbers, icons set in precise alignment. Any deviation was enough to spark her ire. Those who made mistakes, even unintentionally, risked her disfavor. Life at court became a careful choreography where every step was part of a ceremony. Her days bent increasingly to these rules.
Once she ruled by counsel and calculation. Now she was guided by signs and omens. Ambassadors who came with proposals of peace were dismissed outright. Any thought of compromise was seen as temptation, a trick of the enemy, a sin. Servants and courtiers were trapped in an invisible net. They lived in constant expectation. One could not cough in her presence, could not look away, could not betray disgust. Fear filled the air, for even the smallest show of weakness could be read as heresy. Worst of all, her faith had ceased to be a quiet inner light. It had hardened into a blade aimed at everyone around her. Isabella now saw herself as the vessel of God's will. She believed her suffering purified not just her own soul, but all of Spain. And if her body endured torment, then her people must endure as well. Thus the vow, born in sacred fire, ceased to be a private devotion. It became a heavy law, an invisible wall pressing down on courtiers, soldiers, and the entire kingdom. Each day under the shadow of her oath deepened the atmosphere of fear and submission. All of this prepared the ground for the final chapter of Granada's fate. But what was being decided was not only the destiny of fortresses and armies. With each day it became clearer. Alongside the enemy within Granada's walls, Isabella was waging war against her own body and mind, and that war promised to be no less merciless. When the forces of Castile and Aragon surrounded Granada, its fall seemed only a matter of time. The emirate was already weakened by division and shortage of men. Many of her generals assured her the city could be taken within months if pressed hard. But near Isabella, reality obeyed different laws. She did not want a swift victory. She wanted a victory that mirrored her own ordeal, long, painful, and hard-won.
From the first days of the siege, she refused to consider peace offers from the emirs. Any letter of surrender was declared a trick of evil, a temptation to be resisted. Nobles and commanders tried to argue, but their voices drowned against her icy conviction. No mercy, no agreements, only complete submission. She took up residence in the camp beside her soldiers. Yet her presence, instead of inspiring them, weighed on their spirits. Soldiers whispered of nights when strange noises came from her tent, coughing, the rustle of cloth, muffled groans. Rumors spread of sores on her skin, of insects beneath her garments. None dared speak openly, but fear moved through the ranks. Men avoided her when they could. Those ordered into her tent tied cloths over their faces, soaked in herbs and resins to withstand the stifling air. Hardened officers, veterans of countless battles, admitted that a summons to the queen was harder to face than the battlefield itself. And still, discipline held. Any doubt in her decisions was punished instantly. The army fought on, less from loyalty than from fear of her fanatical resolve. And as the siege dragged on, it became clear. Its very length was part of her vow. She was not simply waiting for victory. She demanded that her soldiers' suffering match her own torment. Cardinal Mendoza, her confessor, secretly tried to keep notes of what he saw. He realized Isabella's mind was changing, that her faith was hardening into a dangerous obsession. In one letter, he even admitted that she seemed to take a grim satisfaction in prolonging the war, as if turning it into a mirror of her own torment. But he burned the letter before sending it, terrified that it might serve as his death sentence. Granada itself was starving, worn down by hunger and exhaustion, yet the Queen's armies suffered just as much. Disease cut through the ranks, winter winds broke men's strength. Still, there could be no retreat. The Queen endured, and so must everyone else. Her personal vow had become a chain binding the entire army. And then, when the city's walls finally cracked under relentless blows, it was clear. With the fall of Granada, the last barrier would also fall, the barrier that had kept Isabella's vow from revealing its terrible truth. On January 2nd, 1492, the banners of Castile and Aragon were raised above the towers of the Alhambra. Granada had fallen, ending nearly 8 centuries of Muslim presence on the Iberian Peninsula. For all of Europe, it was a symbol of Christianity's ultimate triumph. For Isabella, it meant the fulfillment of the vow that had weighed on her for almost a decade. For the first time since she swore it, she allowed the linen to be removed. It was not simply cloth anymore, it had fused to her body, embedded in wounds, hardened into a second skin. When physicians tried to peel it away, pieces of flesh tore with it. The stench inside her chambers was so heavy that even hardened surgeons covered their faces with cloths soaked in vinegar.
Contemporaries left no direct medical records, but scattered letters from courtiers mention terrible wasting, corruption of the flesh, and wounds born of excessive severity. Rumors spread quickly beyond the palace walls, though official chronicles remained silent. Spain was meant to see its queen as a holy conqueror, not as a woman whose body had been destroyed by a fanatical vow. Historians now believe that after removing the camisa, Isabella suffered severe infections, likely close to sepsis. For 3 months, physicians fought for her life with herbal infusions, vinegar compresses, and endless prayers. She appeared rarely in public, claiming fasting and seclusion. But in that same period of weakness, she made a decision that changed history as profoundly as the conquest of Granada itself. In March 1492, the Alhambra Decree was signed. It ordered the expulsion of all Jews from Spain, unless they converted to Christianity. By various estimates, between 40 and 100,000 people were forced to leave. Families lost their homes, their possessions, their livelihoods. Children and the elderly died on the road. Those who accepted baptism became targets of suspicion, accused of secretly clinging to their old faith, and fell under the watch of the Inquisition. Thus, a personal vow that began with a piece of cloth expanded into policy on a national scale. From the ruin of her own body grew a wave of repression and violence that reshaped the very face of Spain. The Alhambra Decree was a turning point. In the spring of 1492, expulsions swept across the kingdom. Families abandoned homes, shops, workshops, carrying only what they could bear. Many lost their belongings for almost nothing. Others lost everything: gold, books, even the clothes on their backs. Those who converted were branded suspect and soon faced the tribunals. The Inquisition, created by Isabella and Ferdinand back in 1478, now reached unprecedented power. Trials came one after another. Accusations of heresy grew louder and more frequent. People were interrogated, tortured, forced to confess their failings against doctrine. Official chronicles describe this as the purification of the nation. But for thousands of families, it meant dispossession, humiliation, and death. These measures also had a pragmatic side. The wealth of the expelled passed directly into the royal treasury. From that very treasury came part of the funds that financed Christopher Columbus's voyage to the New World in August of that same year. The gold and jewels taken from the exiles became the foundation of the great age of discovery. In Isabella's eyes, all of this carried divine purpose. She saw the expulsions and the burning pyres as an extension of her vow. Just as she had purified herself through suffering, so too must Spain be purified through hardship and blood.
After 1492, the royal court slowly transformed into a stage of ostentatious asceticism.
Nobles and courtiers began imitating her example, flaunting their own penance. Aristocrats walked barefoot in processions, scourged themselves with whips, and entered churches wearing blood-stained shirts. All of it was hailed as proof of true faith. The cult of suffering quickly seeped into art. Painters were commissioned to depict the torments of saints and the horrors of hell. Music became solemn and heavy, stripped of joy. Even sculpture changed its tone. Angels no longer smiled, but cast down their eyes in grief. Joy at court was seen as unworthy, and laughter itself could be branded blasphemy. Scholars and thinkers found themselves in the greatest danger. Any attempt to discuss the nature of the world without constant reference to scripture was treated with suspicion. Physicians who tried to explain disease in natural terms risked prosecution. Philosophers withdrew into silence or fled abroad. Some burned their own manuscripts rather than face accusation. Thus the Queen's vow, once a private act tied to a simple piece of cloth, became a model for imitation. It was no longer a personal story, but a standard imposed by aristocracy and clergy across the realm. Spain sank into an atmosphere of fear and repression, where the very word joy was gradually replaced by submission. That same year, 1492, the year Granada fell and the expulsion decree was signed, Spain also stepped into empire. Columbus's expedition won royal approval. Part of its financing came from the treasury swelled by the confiscated wealth of the exiles. The irony was brutal. The tragedy of thousands of families became the seed of a new world. Columbus sailed from Palos de la Frontera in August. Isabella personally endorsed the project, seeing it as the continuation of her sacred mission. If war had purified Spain within, then voyages must expand its influence abroad. The fall of Granada and Columbus's crossing became linked as one. The end of the Reconquista, the beginning of colonial conquest. Spain entered a golden age, but behind the glow lay expulsions, pyres, and a nation that had forgotten how to laugh. In 1504, Isabella died. By then, her body had been ravaged by years of illness and fanatical practices. Yet almost immediately after her burial began another process, the creation of a myth. Official chronicles did not describe a wasted woman scarred by wounds and rituals, but the Catholic queen, saintly patroness of a united Spain. Artists painted her with radiant face and serene eyes. Sculptors cast monuments showing her as the symbol of strength and faith. The legend of the vow was softened or erased altogether. What had once terrified her court was transformed for posterity into a model of humility and piety.
Thus began the deliberate cleansing of memory. The people were not to recall the stench of rotting cloth, but the triumph under the cross. The Spanish monarchy inherited a convenient symbol, while the terrible truth survived only in whispers and forgotten letters. After Isabella, the legacy passed to her daughter, Juana. Along with the crown, she inherited her mother's heavy shadow. Contemporaries noted her unstable behavior, fits of jealousy, strange speeches, nocturnal wanderings through the palace. Very soon, she was given the name by which history remembers her, Juana la Loca, Joanna the Mad. Some historians see this as a hereditary obsession reaching back to Isabella. Juana claimed to feel her mother's presence, spoke to shadows, and after the death of her husband, Philip the Handsome, refused to part with his body, traveling with his coffin, an act that sealed her reputation for madness. In practice, she was isolated and stripped of power. Spain was ruled by her father, Ferdinand, and later by her son, Charles V. Thus, Isabella's fanatic faith and her heavy legacy not only shaped the destiny of a kingdom, but destroyed the life of her daughter, turning her into the symbol of dynastic tragedy.
Over time, the myth of the sainted queen began to crack. By the 16th and 17th centuries, chroniclers cautiously hinted at Isabella's excessive severity. In later centuries, scholars approached her story with medical eyes. Psychiatrists pointed to signs of obsessive-compulsive disorder, ritual repetition, rigid prohibitions, the cult of suffering. Doctors wrote of chronic skin infections, parasites, even possible sepsis. Anthropologists argued that the mass expulsions and Inquisition amounted to a form of collective trauma rooted in Isabella's personal vow. Facts suppressed by official chronicles gradually surfaced through letters of ambassadors, reports of doctors, and rare private notes. Instead of the radiant figure of a saintly monarch, emerged the image of a woman whose obsession swelled until it consumed an entire nation. Today, Isabella is remembered in two ways. To some, she is still the Catholic queen who united Spain and opened the path to the New World. To others, she is the symbol of fanaticism, who turned a private vow into a policy of expulsions, pyres, and silence. Her linen shift is long gone, but its memory remains. Cloth fused into flesh, a symbol of faith that became destruction. Spain did rise to the rank of world power, but its glory was built on ruins, on expulsions, and on fear. And it is this paradox that makes Isabella's figure so hauntingly compelling. She united a kingdom, yet infected it with a cult of suffering. She gave the world new lands, but robbed her own people of voice and freedom. Her story lives not only in chronicles, but as a warning. Power cloaked in the language of holiness can drag a nation into the abyss. And when a symbol ceases to be just a sign of faith and becomes a reality that corrodes both body and mind, it is not only the person who perishes, but the destiny of an entire country.